Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you some of the frequently asked questions I have about the Fujifilm firmware upgrades. Now, there's been a couple of recent upgrades in the Fuji system, most notably the X-T3 update came up earlier this week, as well as the X-T4 had a firmware update last month. If you're looking for more detailed information, excuse me, on any of those updates, I have videos for those. I will link them down in the description below so you can check out the actual updates for each one. Now, I have had a few questions on all these videos, so I thought this one would be useful to share my kind of frequently asked questions and some tips on upgrading your Fuji camera properly. This will be a good refresher for people that have cameras that haven't been updated for a while, but also if you're new to the Fuji system as well. So first off, the best place, obviously the only place and the best place to get your Fuji update is from the Fuji website. You can check on the support website. I will link again down below to the Fuji website, and you can see all of the recent firmware updates for your Fuji cameras. You can download only the latest versions of the software from the website, and it's always recommended that your camera is updated to the latest version. So there is a couple of ways that you can update your Fuji camera to the latest firmware. First one is via a SD memory card through the camera. You'll have to download the software from the internet on your browser and then either connect it into your computer. If you have a SD card slot on your computer, you can just put the card directly into the computer and drag and drop the full the update file onto the SD card. If you don't have a SD card slot, you can purchase a little USB adapter that will take the card, and then you can transfer your file that way. Either way will work. One thing you want to be sure with the memory card, however, is it has to be formatted and nothing else on it. The only file that you can have on there is the firmware update itself. So you'll want to make sure that in the camera first, before you drag and drop off your computer, is format the card quickly in your camera. If you're looking for information how to format a camera, I have videos on that as well. I'll link all these down below. So you'll want to have a formatted card and only the firmware update in your camera to put on into your camera when you do it. What I recommend is having a separate card just in your, keep it in your camera bag as a backup card that you would normally maybe use, but not have it in your camera all the time. That way you're not having to worry about formatting and losing any pictures or video that you have on the card. You don't need a large card. The firmware updates are usually very small in terms of space, so you can even use an old card that you haven't used for a while. Any SD card will work. You can also update it through, if you've downloaded on your phone, if you've downloaded the Fuji camera remote app, and this works, I know it does work with the X series cameras. It should work with the other ones as well that are compatible with the Fuji app. Once you have your camera connected, it will check to see if there is, you can check and see if there's a latest firmware available. And you can also download and update your firmware from the app as well. It's a bit clunky, the app's not the greatest, so what I kind of recommend doing is using the SD card. It seems to be a lot easier and a lot faster now. So I've had a couple questions from people watching my prior videos on firmware updates, and one of the ones was, if I'm buying a new camera, do I need to update my firmware? And yes, I would double check on your camera to make sure you're up to the latest firmware. You can check that by holding down the display back button as you turn on the camera, and it'll let you know the version. You'll have to cross-reference it with the version that's available online, and that will let you know that you have to update or not. Now, a lot of times when you do buy a camera from the store, it may have been sitting in stock, so it probably does need an update. A lot of times they are sitting for a while, and when they're shipped from the factory, they might be even a couple of versions lower. So you'll want to double check that when you first buy a new camera. And with the firmware updates as well on a new camera, if you're buying it with kit lens or you have other Fuji lenses that you're trying, is make sure that you also update your firmware of your lenses that you're using after you do the update of any firmware. That way you'll make sure you're running the latest firmware on everything, and everything should work properly. And another question that I've had, which is a really good one, is if I have an older version of the firmware update on my camera and I've missed maybe a couple of versions, do I have to update to each one before going to the latest? And the answer is no. You can upgrade your camera to the most recent firmware from any basically version for your camera. You actually can't download on the Fuji website. You can actually download the older prior versions anyways. So if you're getting your firmware downloads from the, right from the manufacturer, the latest update is the one you want to install. Now also too, when you are running your update, you're going to want to make sure your battery is fully charged. It's not something you want to do when you have a half-used battery. Now the updates and firmware updates don't take very long. They usually take a few minutes or so. It'll have a status bar that goes along and it will tell you how long it's going to take. It doesn't take long. Camera will then restart. That being said, you'll want to make sure you do have a full battery. Sometimes the updates can just take a little bit longer. You want to make sure that your update gets a chance to go through the whole process without the battery, especially without the battery dying. If your firmware update stops halfway through, you can try to restart it by starting the process again. But sometimes that can, if it's stopped halfway through, it can really kind of harm your camera and you may actually have to send it back. I haven't had that happen with any of my cameras, that even the ones that have stopped doing a firmware partway through, but it's just something to keep in mind. Keep your battery, make sure your battery is full when you're charging, or sorry, when you're updating your firmware of your camera. Now, when you're putting your firmware into the camera with your SD memory card, you might sometimes get a few error messages that will pop up on the screen. And the biggest thing that I find, the error that causes that, is the card may be if you're using especially like an older card, you want to again make sure it's formatted in your camera prior to attaching it to your computer and dragging and dropping the firmware update in it. If you just put the card into your computer and put the firmware software on there, there might be some other hidden files on there that are saved from maybe a different camera or something like that. You want to make sure the only file that is actually on the memory card is your firmware update so it can get transferred properly. And as you're saving the file onto your memory card, don't forget, do not rename the file to anything. Do it completely as you download it. Don't rename any of the file name. The camera needs that exact file name in order to update the camera properly. And probably the last kind of common error you might find when you're trying to import your new firmware from your camera is it might not recognize the firmware because you've downloaded the wrong one. It can be a bit confusing. There's different versions of cameras. Like for example, the latest XT camera is the XT4, but there's also an XT3, there's an XT2, there's an XT1. So when you're downloading something, just make sure when you're on the website that you're downloading the version for your camera. Whatever Fuji camera you have, you want to make sure you're downloading the correct firmware version. Thanks for watching, everybody, my firmware FAQ. If you did have any questions further to this, leave me a comment down below. I'd be happy to answer them for you in either a comment or filming a new video on the Fuji system. I'm new to the Fuji system. I'm learning it as well, so it's great to have everybody following along. If you did find this video useful, I always appreciate giving me a like. And if you're new to the channel and not subscribed, please consider subscribing and following along. And I'm sharing regular tips and tricks on the Fuji system on this channel, and it would be great to have you follow along the videos as well. Until my next video, you can check out this one. These are my top 5 tips for new Fuji users. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you soon.